Will, thanks for taking the time to chat with me today. It's always a pleasure to connect with CS fellow leaders, especially those who are navigating the exciting world of B2B SaaS. And one of the things I really appreciate about this type of conversations is the chance to dive into not just the technical aspects of our work, but also the personal journeys that shape our perspective. And speaking of personal journeys, I came across something interesting in my research about you, and it turns out we have something else in common rather than customer success. We are both parents navigating the challenges and joys of parenting. And I've got one daughter who's already teaching me more about management than any book or webinar ever could. And I hear you are a proud dad of three daughters. That's quite an amazing experience, I bet. I can barely manage one, to say so. How has this journey of fatherhood reshaped your approach to leadership in B2B SaaS space?
Yeah, quite a bit. I think the biggest lesson I've learned as a parent, and my journey is kind of unique in itself. Happy to talk through that, but the biggest lesson that I've learned, I think, is being in charge is hard, right? There are a million decisions to be made. When we went through the foster to adopt process, and when we first got our girls, they were 4, 3, and a newborn. So we had a wide array of personalities and life at that point. But ultimately, what we found is we were 100 times busier by adding 3 kids than we were when it was just my wife and I. And there were a million decisions being made at any given time. I'm hungry. Can I go outside? My sister stole my toy, right? But what we found was pretty early on that our kids were really capable. So by the time they were 5, they were making their own breakfast and they were packing their own lunches and cleaning up their rooms and doing all the things that we otherwise would have been doing. So ultimately, I think we had to give them a framework to do that, right? Like to work through arguments and things like that. But ultimately, what I think really aligns with managing people in a company is you have to give them a framework, you have to work with them, but you ultimately empower them to make decisions and you empower them to go solve their own problems. What this is going to do is it's going to reduce the decisions that you have to make as the manager, and decision exhaustion will start to go away, right? When you're making 1,000 decisions a day, it's a lot more exhausting than when you're making 20 decisions a day. I would think that that's probably the biggest parallel that I've found, but being in charge is hard.
I never thought of implementing a proper framework, so I'll have to do a similar thing with my kids as well.
Yeah.
Starting at a new company as a CSM, especially in the first 30 days, must be a bit like diving into parenting. A lot of adapting and learning on the fly. How do these early days shape your approach to customer success?
I think what we have to realize is that, and I think I even wrote a blog about this, I'm happy to send it over, but I think what I realized pretty early on is curveballs can create home runs, right? Just because somebody throws a curveball at you doesn't mean you can't hit the ball. I think our adoption journey was very similar, but even when you're starting a new company or joining a new company, the reality is you spend a bunch of time interviewing and having conversations, and that's kind of the honeymoon phase, right? You're asking questions, they're asking questions, you're getting to know each other. But ultimately, when you get hired on or you start the company, you're going to realize that 2-week to 6-week interview time period was nothing in the grand scheme of things. And there's a million other things to learn. So I think that's where thinking long-term kind of shines through. If you're thinking about it short-term, when you join a company or start a company, I think the challenge is at the first sight of something unexpected, you're going to try and find a way to get out. So you have to be prepared for those curveballs. You have to be prepared for those situations that you didn't expect, or learning something that you thought was otherwise not true or true. You just have to be prepared to work through those long term.
You mentioned about learning in the first month, in the first weeks of taking a new CS challenge. How do you prioritize the learning process? Because you have to talk with so many stakeholders. You have to, and besides, you have maybe your team, maybe your peers. You have to go through the product. You have to go through processes if they do exist. Where do you start? What's the most important thing?
Yeah, the key I think is to know what fires to put out, what fires to let burn, and what fires to let smolder, right? So you have to prioritize, and I think the way that you do that is when you first join, you're going to learn about the problems really early on, right? Everyone's going to tell you the problems. No one's going to tell you the successes. That's just human nature. We have an issue. We have a tendency to talk about issues rather than solutions. So I think really the first week or two is really spent having conversations with everybody in the organization. Anybody that's currently in CS, that's customer facing, the sales team, the management team, product team, what are you hearing? Having those conversations with the individual contributors and the leaders of the company are really going to give you that problem list. And then the problem list becomes prioritizing. So it becomes figuring out, again, what fires absolutely have to be put out right now, what fires you can kind of let burn over here that aren't as important, and what fires to kind of let smolder and they're kind of building up. You'll quickly learn your priority list just by conversations. People are pretty open and transparent, especially about problems that affect them.
What I read from what you said takes me to focus. And I think this is one of the most important things not necessarily we're not only in a customer success role. And I know that you second this. How do you apply this idea of focus to enhance the customer success and scale the business effectively?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of focus. The reality is if you want to do anything with excellence, you have to focus, right? And I have dozens of tricks and tactics that you can use, and happy to talk through a few of those. But
Please do that.
yeah, the overarching message is if you want to do something high quality, you simply can't multitask. And that's coming from someone who loves to multitask, right? It's very much in my nature to work on 10 different things at once. But I have to rein myself in and realize that if I really want to get something done to the highest quality, it all comes down to focus. So it's probably easier when we're talking about focus, it's probably easier to start backwards or start at the end and work our way backwards. Why is focus important? Let's start with the end result, right? The end result is I want to get more done and I want to get it done to a higher quality and I want to get it done efficiently, right? So if that's the end goal, what prevents you from getting to that? Usually it's internal and external distractions, right? So what are those distractions? Decisions are a big one, which we've already talked about today. Making lots and lots and lots of decisions can be distracting and take away from your focus. Other work is constantly competing to get done. Meetings are a big distraction. So what do we do to eliminate those distractions? This is ultimately where we come full circle. So decisions, we just have to make less of them, right? We have to empower others to make decisions. We have to reduce decision exhaustion. This is one of my tips, right? One of my tips around decision exhaustion is I have a uniform that I wear every day. And we talked about this off camera on the way in, and it's not literally a uniform, right? But I have this hat that I wear 5 or 6 days a week. I have every color t-shirt in this brand. I have, so I don't have to make the decision when I first wake up, what am I wearing today? It's just one less decision that I have to make. I eat, and some people, foodies are going to be mad at me. I eat the same thing every day for lunch. I don't have to make a decision. I eat the same thing. It takes me 15 minutes to eat and it's done, right? So I'm eliminating those decisions, which reduces my decision exhaustion. Other work creeping in at the wrong times. How do we solve that? That was the second one. And I have a one tab rule. So what I mean by that is When I have something that I need to get done, I will pull one tab off my browser and only focus on that one tab for a set period of time or until the task is complete, depending on the priority of it. So, and then I set my computer to do not disturb, right? So no more like 600 tabs across the top. You're bouncing around, you're getting notifications here and there and everywhere, right? One tab is kind of my I'm going to zero in on this and focus only on this aspect. And then the third was meetings. And I think a lot of people talk about this and it's almost cliche to talk about it, but it's like just reduce the recurring meetings that you have on your calendar, right? Time block, set specific blocks on your calendar for when you're going to get work done versus when you're going to meet with other people. One thing that I know for sure, based on scientific research, is 10 a.m. is the most productive hour mentally for people in the normal workday, right? It's been proven over and over and over many times. So 10 a.m. on my calendar is blocked. No one can book 10 a.m. because I know that that's my time to go in and get work done for that 60-minute period. So I think there's a million ways to optimize output, but I think focus is the vehicle that gets us there.
It sounds coming from coming from a person who works in customer success. I know that focus is important, but I hear very often multitasking. So I have to take this information and try to see I actually ask you, how do you apply it in
Yeah,
your CS role? Because for me, it sounds very hard to do that
for
because
sure.
you have a lot of client meetings. There's always an emergency. In customer success, there's always a fire drill to handle.
Yeah.
So dig a
Hey,
bit deeper into how
we
do you organize, for instance, your day in order to keep this focus.
we have to go back to the which fires do we let smolder, which fires do we put out, and which fires do we let burn, right? There is always a fire in customer success, absolutely. And these rules are going to get broken, right? But if you stick to these rules 90% of the time, you will be more efficient. So the 10 a.m. thing is a non-negotiable for me. Unless someone calls me, because I won't see it, right? If I don't have Slack open and I don't have my email open and I don't have our help desk open and I don't have, if I don't have all these things open and I'm only focusing on one thing, the only way somebody's going to get a hold of me is call me or text me, but I probably won't see it if it's text. They'll have to call me, right? So that's a non-negotiable for me. That's my 1 hour in the day. No one can disturb me during the workday, and I can get things done. I can narrow in and focus. But at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to you have to set the rules for yourself to be productive. There are always going to be distractions. There's always going to be a fire. There's always going to be someone calling you, trying to get your attention. A million things compete for your attention every day. It's the question is, what are you going to give your attention to? So while it is difficult for sure, it's absolutely difficult in the sense that there's so many things competing for your time. You have to outline those rules that you're going to follow and you have to follow them. If you don't follow them, it's not a controlled experiment and you don't know if they work or not. So follow those for 30 days and see if they work. And my guess is you'll come out being more productive at the end of those 30 days.
In my case, the thing that I've learned from being a mom is that okay, focus is one thing. I cannot do I think I was a multitasking person before being a mom, but now I think it's a combination between focus and multitasking. I've learned that I can do so many things in 5 minutes and I'm not wasting it. And I think I've learned that time is the most valuable resource that I have, and it is very limited. So yeah, indeed, I decide very well on where do I consume my energy. So I do share uh, your beliefs.
I love that. Time is your most valuable resource that you can offer, right? To anyone, because again, there's so many things competing for your time, including your family and your kids. You have to make time for that. So I'm with you. I agree.
And besides this, another thing that I had to adapt is with unpredictability. I was the person who was always doing a plan to a plan to a backup plan. I had backup plans to backup plans where I realized that what the kid basically learned is that I have to deal and adapt to all those situations. Now, I do see a parallel. So I want to ask you, how do you adapt to surprises or shifts in strategy when it comes to customer success? Because priorities do change. How do you do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to curveballs can produce home runs, right? I mean, some of the craziest curveballs I've been thrown in life have produced home runs, have been the greatest thing that have happened to me, including my kids. And like, I'll go back to that for 1 second, which is when my wife and I first started our foster care journey, we brought home a brand new little baby girl, right? 5 months later, the state called us and said, "Can you take her two sisters?" Right? Unexpectedly, out of the blue, we had no idea that that was even an option on the table. It was a massive curveball, right? We didn't know what to do at first, and then we said, "Of course, it's her two sisters. We have to do this," right? Unexpected on our side, greatest reward ever. Same thing with customer success and with business in general. You're going to get curveballs, right? Like it's going to happen. You're going to get unexpected situations, good news, bad news. 50% of the time, the thing that you expect is going to happen happens. 25% of the time, you're going to be pleasantly surprised, and 25% of the time, you're going to be let down or discouraged. You just have to keep going. Like I tell my girls all the time, there are two options in life. You either give up or you keep going. And if giving up isn't a realistic option, then you keep going, right? It really narrows it down for you when you boil it down to those two options.
You've been working in different industries, from real estate, health tech, marketing, or automation. I'm curious, are customer success challenges unique to each industry or do they overlap? Are there key differences, similarities that you've noticed?
Ye- I think the challenges are the same, right? Challenges and goals are the same. There's certainly different strategies or tactics that you can use in each industry, but at the end of the day, CS wants less churn and more customer growth over time, right? Like when you really look at it as key ingredients at the very end or key outputs at the end, those are the things that we want in customer success. So I think usually the way you get there is more customer usage, faster time to value, enhanced value over time. I think it's universal, right? It's we sometimes overcomplicate these things into something that they're not. And the reality is if you poll 1,000 customer success teams and say, here's a multiple choice question of what is most important, everyone's going to say, I want less churn and I want more customer growth, right? It's just that's how customer success works.
What are the biggest obstacles in gaining actionable insights for the CS team? And how do you
Yeah.
overcome those?
Yeah. I think this is a super important question and something that not a lot of people are asking, or they might be asking it in slightly the wrong way. So what I mean by that is everyone talks about the famous quote, right? What isn't measured isn't managed. I think as an industry, we've kind of outgrown this quote because everything to a degree is measured today, right? I think the challenge that most people are going through is it's not organized enough for them to understand the measurements or to have the key insights. So you have to get the metrics into one place that you're looking for. Chances are they're being measured already. So you have to get them to a place where you can easily digest those and they're visible to everyone. And for the items that are less quantifiable, like customer sentiment, right? That's a good one. I think AI is helping us with that already, and I think it'll make it a lot better over time. But you just have to capture that. You have to have your CS team capture those sentiments across all your customer interactions, and that has to feed into the data model. Most of the time, people just aren't good at seeing the data that's being measured. And it's not their fault, right? They're not, as a CS leader or as a CS manager or team lead or something like that, right? You're not a systems engineer. Your job is not to build these systems so you can easily see the data in most cases. Uh, but it is someone's job to do that, or it should be someone's job to do that. So we just have to work with those people to get the data that we need to make informed decisions in the right place where it's easily accessible for the right people.
I often find that because we are chasing, we want numbers. We want to measure everything from everywhere. Everything is important. And then when we look at the data, we can't answer the question, and now what? And
Yeah.
now what do we do with with all the numbers that we have, with all the reports? How do we make sure that we are not only, because tracking is part of the problem, and then what you do with the results and what the data tells you is another thing. How do we
Yep.
make sure that we are reading the data correct? What do we need?
You have to measure consistently. That's the challenge. It's a challenge that a lot of people face, right? Is the data isn't consistent, which is ultimately going to change where the goalpost is, right? So as long as you're measuring data consistent, in my experience, even if you're measuring it wrong to some degree, there's some margin of error there. Even if you're measuring it wrong, if you're measuring it consistently over time, you should see gaps shrinking where they should shrink, gaps growing where they should grow, right? But I think that's the challenge is everyone wants perfect data. Perfect data isn't real. It's kind of like the unicorn that everybody's chasing. It's not exactly a real thing most of the time, especially in smaller companies, right? When you're talking about a company size of under 100 employees with $10 million ARR or something like that, like your data is just not mature enough to be consistent and in a way that you can make every decision off of. You should try to make as many data-driven decisions as possible, but at the end of the day, you just have to measure that data consistently and see incremental increases and getting better.
Speaking about data, I want to speak about tools that basically help us extract this data. How crucial is it to choose and use the right tools and the technology stack in customer success? And how much does this impact the effectiveness of a CS team?
Well, I think it's difficult today to choose the right tools in many cases, right? Like it's just, there's so much software out there. Making the right decision is really hard. But I also find in the customer success world, onboarding world like us, right? That it's probably the most undervalued, underfunded team in an organization. When you look at sales and engineering budgets, are massive compared to CS budgets. Still today, I think the market's coming around, but it's still a big discrepancy today. But that's really why we created Onboard. Is like I was looking around and I saw that customer onboarding teams typically used Excel files or generic project management to onboard. So I figured there had to be a better way, and if there wasn't, then we were going to create it. But what I typically find, and just like a recommendation, I guess, for the listeners, is in any industry, in any department, in any department org, right, is solutions that are geared for the specific problem that you're trying to solve are likely going to cause more efficiency gain than wider solutions. And I often equate it to bowling, and I'm not personally a bowler, but I know that if I'm bowling down a lane that has rails on it, I'm not going to go out of bounds. If I'm bowling down a lane that doesn't have rails on it, I'm going to be out of bounds. So that's the same way I think about it with software. If you're going with a super wide solution that can do everything for everyone, you're going to find that it does nothing for anyone. When you're bowling down a lane or using a software that's specific to the problem that you're trying to solve, usually you're going to be able to solve that problem. Now, I think there's something to be said about platforms versus point solutions, but I also think that there's a reason that point solutions exist today, right? Because they solve a problem. So I think from an impact perspective in the customer success world, in the onboarding world, in the support world, technology makes you more efficient. It's the same across every other department and every other org. So super crucial. Unfortunately, harder to make a decision than it should be in today's world, but I think that'll all change over time, right? I think as more software providers focus on customer success as or an organization that they want to support, right, or a department they want to support, I think it's going to become easier and more scalable to pick the right solution.
I'm just curious now because you mentioned that it's hard to pick the right solution. How do you take your decisions? How are SaaS products convince you to try them out? What do they
Yeah,
do? What do they need to do?
I'll tell you one thing, it's rarely LinkedIn email or InMail, despite getting 60,000 InMails a day. But I think the way that I've always purchased, and the interesting part about that question, I've kind of found myself falling into that role across every company that I've ever been at in the last 14 years as enterprise software purchaser, right? And kind of the way that I've done it is I usually identify the problem, design the solution, and then find the software that supports the solution. I always say purpose before technology, meaning like if we're solving this one problem, what is the ideal solution for that? Now let's go find technology to support that. So again, it's working backwards. It's the same thing we did earlier with focus, right? Is you kind of have to work backwards in that scenario of what am I really trying to solve? What's the ideal solution and what can support that framework or that architecture that I'm putting in place. And then you just go out and do a lot of demos and ask a lot of questions and ultimately hope that you make the right decision.
And how do you get funded for this? How do you take the
So
leadership buy-in for this? That's one of
yeah,
the
and
things that CS leaders do speak about. It's hard for them to be funded. And you also mentioned that CS
yeah,
is actually the team that it's the most unfunded if you compare it with sales, for instance.
yeah. So I'm going to tie this into how do you make the right pitch to get the right software, get the budget for the software? I'm going to make the same argument for headcount here. And I'm going to make the same argument for if you as an individual want to move to a different role in the company. Let's say you want to go from a success team lead to a manager or director, right? It's all the same process. And what's funny about this is I literally just had this conversation on Monday with a CS team lead that wanted to move to director at a different company, right? And it was a connection that we had made and I had a conversation with them. So ultimately, it's the same process. So the process is you have to evaluate the problem first. How big is this problem that we're trying to solve? And is it a legitimate problem? And you have to quantify that. And it may not be as simple as if we solve this problem, we gain 2 customers and we retain 2 more customers, right? It may not be that straightforward math. But if it is, this problem takes 20 hours a month away from our team. On average, our team makes X dollars per hour. If we can reduce that by 75%, here is the tangible value of what we're trying to do. After you identify and quantify the problem, it then becomes make it easy for the person that you have to go get budget from to make the decision. And the way that you do that is you outline the problem, outline the cost of the problem, outline the solution cost, and make it extremely easy for them to say yes. So in moving from a team lead to a director, what you have to tell the person that's making that decision and what you have to convince them of is, I'm going to be more valuable by being in a director level than I am in a team lead level. And you have to quantify that. If you can't quantify that, then you have to ask yourself, do I want this just because I want this, or is this what's best for the organization? Same thing when you're trying to pitch getting funding for software or getting budget for software is, do I want this because I like it? Or do I want this because this is actually going to make an impact for my team and for my company and save us time and energy and effort down the road? So I think that's it is I see, and I've seen it a million times, but it's, hey, we really need this software. And I say, great, we need the software. Why do we need it? Well, we have this problem over here. Great. How much money or time or resource is that problem costing us? I have no idea. It's like, well, then how do you know that we need to pay for something to solve it? Like, it may be costing us 15 minutes a month, which at the end of the day isn't worth $1,000 a month in software, right? So I think that's it is I think you have to think through the problem, think through the cost savings of a solution, make sure when you're having that conversation that it's actually justified and it's not a selfish decision, right, to buy it. It's going to make the organization better.
You mentioned about team lead and the director's roles and positions, and I want to switch gears to another important pillar in customer success, and that's the team. We talked about the foundation, we talked about the processes, the framework of technology, and now let's talk about the people. What are the essential roles within a customer success team? And at what stage in a company's growth do you typically see these roles emerging?
Yeah, super great question. Different stage companies need different things or different roles. I would say if you're a startup, and when I say startup, 5 people or less in customer success, you're going to have generalists, right? That's a really small company. You're going to have generalists. They're going to be doing everything. They're going to be onboarding customers. They're going to be managing them. They're going to be supporting them. They're going to be doing everything. That's a challenging time for sure. The end goal is what I think most people have in mind. When I am a 500 person or 1,000 person company, the team setup is going to be, we're going to have onboarding over here. We're going to have customer success management here. We're going to have support here. We're going to have a layer of ops over top of them that's making sure that they're the most efficient that they can possibly be, right? You have this end vision. The question is, when do you split? When do you start becoming specialized? I think, and I err on the side of early on that, which is once you have your 5th person in customer success, you should be thinking about splitting. And I think there's 2 logical paths at that stage, which is onboarding and customer success management, and customer success management handles support, or vice versa. Onboarding and they handle support, and then CSMs handle the ongoing management. But that's like, again, small, right? So there's 5 people. So from 5 people to 15 or 20 people in customer success, that can kind of be where you land, right? As you can be in that there's 2 roles within the department. After that, it splits into 3. So you have onboarding, success management, support. And the way that you make that decision on which direction to go is based off of your specific product, right? If you have a product that's highly technical for onboarding and it has a ton of support questions, but your management of the customer isn't that often, right? How does that split? Versus the implementation is really easy. The product is wide. Anyone can onboard it themselves with the help of one or two calls from us. And the support is rare, but there's this management piece of extending or adding use cases. That's a whole different split of how you split the roles. Additionally, there's a personality piece behind this. So when you're small, 5 to 10 people in the organization, in the CS organization, you kind of have to design based off of personalities. So the personality of someone that likes to onboard and is very good at it is a very different personality than someone that likes to manage relationships. If you have someone that's very project focused, and I feel like I can make fun of that group a little bit because that's how I am. I'm very project focused. If you have someone like that and you stick them in a role of a CSM where they're managing that customer for 2 years, let's say, if you're lucky, you'll get 2 years out of that person managing relationships between people. When you're project focused, you like to focus on projects. When you're relationship focused, you like to be in there for a long, extended period of time, building that relationship over time. Two totally different personalities, totally different roles. You have to make sure the right people are in the right roles throughout the life cycle of that company.
Speaking about personalities, I want to ask you, when you are recruiting, what are those skills that you are looking for, and which is that thing which is non-negotiable and you don't hire?
Yeah. 2 non-negotiables up front. I am absolutely, and here's a spoiler. They're all, every skill that I have in my mind right now is a soft skill, right? So the 2 non-negotiables, self-awareness and situational awareness. So what I mean by those 2 things, if you are building a team and you're building a team full of people that have no self-awareness, that team is going to be very dysfunctional and not a joy to work on, right? If you're building a team full of people that have self-awareness, they know what they're good at, they know what they're not good at, certainly helps that. Situational awareness, on the other hand, also very important. If I'm on a call and the customer is visibly angry and I'm not picking up on those cues, that's not a great personality trait to be lacking for customer success, right? So self-awareness, situational awareness, my 2 non-negotiables, absolutely. Team has to have it or I can't make the hire. I'll go through kind of a few other things that I've had on previous like great teams that I've managed, which are people that check their ego at the door, right? I'm the same way, right? You got to check your ego at the door. You can't think you're the best at everything. And it kind of goes along with self-awareness, but check your ego at the door. Lifelong learners. I love hiring people that love to learn. I love to learn. I listen to podcasts. I listen to audiobooks, right? Like I'm constantly listening to something that I'm hoping increases my knowledge in life. But people that like to learn are typically great on the customer success team. And last, I'm going to say team players, because again, it kind of comes back to if the team's not functioning well, it's really hard to hit goals. It's really hard to have success as a group in customer success if your team's not playing well together.
The soft skills are the hardest to test in an interview process. What's your secret recipe? How do you find out if there is a good fit or not?
So through a series of situational questions. So I have a list of situational questions. And again, I'm happy to send this over if you want to share it out with your listeners as well. But I have a series of situational questions for CSMs and onboarding specialists, where basically what I'm trying to figure out is, are you self-aware? Are you situational aware? And then also for the split role of onboarding and CS, I'm trying to figure out, are you project focused in life or are you relationship focused in life? One of my favorite questions to ask in an interview is, it's a Saturday midday, right? 2:00 in the afternoon, 1:00 in the afternoon, whatever. What are you doing? Right? Very open-ended question, can go a million different ways. But what I'm really looking for is, am I at home building a shed or am I at a friend's house watching a football game? Right? So the reason that I ask that is, if I'm at home building a shed, I'm very project focused. I have a goal. I want to get something done. If I'm at a friend's house watching a game, I'm relationship focused, right? I want to spend time with my friends, and not saying people that focus on projects don't want to spend time with their friends, but they're little indicators, right? And you ask a bunch of these questions that are all kind of related and similar, and you figure out, does this person want to spend time building relationships or do they want to spend time executing projects in their own personal life? What are they interested in? And it really helps figure out which seat that person should sit in on the customer success side.
While you were asking this question, I was thinking, what do I do at Saturday, in a Saturday day at 1 p.m.? And my answer would be, most probably I just had lunch with the family, because we do have a strict hour at which we have lunch. And then most probably I'm trying to convince my daughter to take her noon nap, and she will refuse it. Not sure if it brings me into project or relationship. While
Oh,
explaining, I
yeah.
was trying to see if I'm more on a project person.
You might be a rare split role where, you can do both. You enjoy both. So that's funny.
I wanna ask you what's your take on learning by mistakes, because in my case, some of my most memorable lessons come from turning mistakes into learnings. Do you experience a similar thing? We are usually afraid of making mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, I've made a lot of mistakes and I've learned a lot from them. So I agree. Ultimately, I kind of subscribe to the theory of, if you're not making mistakes, you're not moving fast enough. Meaning, like, if you're kind of wandering through life and not making any mistakes, it's like, well, then you're just not making enough decisions. You're not doing enough, right? And maybe you're doing a lot, but you could do more. So I kind of subscribe to that. But I also subscribe to the fact that knowledge sharing is king. So at my last company, I had 12 people in the customer success role. And what we would do is, every week during our weekly meeting, every single person on the team had to bring a 60-second learning from the week prior. So if you didn't learn something in the last week, you didn't pay attention, right? Like, you should learn a lot of things in a week, but it's a 60-second learning, very basic stuff. It could be a soft skill learning, right? Like, I found out that if I ask this question at this time, I get this response, and this is kind of what I want. Or it could be, hey, I learned something new about our software. If you do this, then this and this and this, right? But if you're constantly sharing those learnings as a team, the team overall is going to make less mistakes. So if you have 10 people on your team, that's 10 learnings a week. That's 40 learnings a month, right? And you can multiply it out from there, 480 learnings a year. So I'm a big fan of sharing that across the team, preventing some of those mistakes. But I also believe that everyone's going to make mistakes. And again, if you're not making mistakes, you're just not doing quite enough.
If you were to whisper a piece of advice in a new CSM's year to help them sidestep common challenges, what would it be?
So this is my favorite question of all time. And and the reason it's my favorite question of all time I tell my teams this weekly. Doesn't matter if you're new or if you're, 5 years in or 10 years into a company. The answer is you are the expert. This is the advice. So if you've spent a few weeks learning a platform, you're a brand new hire, right? You're 4 weeks in. You've spent 4 weeks learning the platform. You've onboarded one company or 2 companies. You've taken 20 support cases. You are officially in the top 1% of people in the world with that platform. Officially. If you look at all the people in the world and all the people that have solved 20 support cases, onboarded 1 or 2 customers, or learned the platform for 4 weeks, it's a very, very, very small number. So you have to have confidence in yourself. As a new employee, as an employee 10 years down the line, you have to be confident that you are the expert and you know more than most people in the world. So when you get on the calls with customers or you're sending emails or you're having customer interactions, you should be confident that you're the expert. It's my one piece of advice that I believe everyone should take. And if you're a manager listening to this, you should go tell your team that they're experts. The morale boost, the confidence boost that you're going to see off of this is massive.
As we bring this interview to a close, I'd like to take a broader look and reflecting on the evolution of the customer success industry as a whole and where it might be headed. What's your vision for the future of CS and where should upcoming CSM focus their energy to stay ahead?
Great question. I'm going to go against the grain here. And I'm going to say future CS is the same CS as today. So I'm not saying things aren't going to change. Things are going to change. What I am saying is, again, we overcomplicate customer success. Everyone's looking for the latest, greatest metric to measure or the buzzword, or there are people that say CS is the new sales, right? Well, it's like, I hate to burst everyone's bubble, but like sales is still sales and CS is still CS, right? They're different. They're great roles, right? Both of them are awesome roles in themselves. They're just different. I think the goals of CS are going to remain the same. The goals of CS are going to be retain customers, increase current growth, right? Or increase current revenue, current customers. I think sales goals are the same, right? Increase baseline new revenue. So my advice to CS as a whole and CSMs is don't get distracted. Focus on the few things that matter most, which are provide a great experience for the customer, over-deliver on things that you've promised, increase usage, right? Pay attention to their usage patterns and help them increase it, get renewals, and help show an increased value to the customer, right? If you do all of those things, then you're like the best CSM in the world, right? If you're doing all those things and really honing in and focusing on those things, figure out the tactics that work for you. And there's a million tactics and a million different things that you can do to increase those numbers. But at the end of the day, it's like, let's focus on the most important things, right? The customer. If we can give the customer an amazing experience and we can increase their usage and we can drive results for them, the rest just kind of falls into place. There's going to be technology that changes. There are going to be metrics that change. There are going to be lots of things that change in this industry, but the end goal is still the same.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for the hour. It was a very nice discussion, and I'm glad we had the chance to do it. Thank you.